So, much of the COVID coverage focuses on policy decisions, the underlying philosophy, numbers, the figures of cases, deaths, about the efficacy of vaccines and things like that nature. But what I wanted to focus on is that COVID hysteria hurts families, and I wanted to talk about some rather upsetting cases. I mean, get the tissues ready. It's going to be relatively depressing, but it's very important to talk about this. I was in somewhat two minds to talk about this at all because it's talking about basically the horrendous suffering that people have gone through. And we're going to look at some individual cases of things which might be pretty infuriating and upsetting, but ultimately I think I want to put a human face on the impact of what these bad government policies have created. So the first of which is the recent news that an unvaccinated father has temporarily lost the right to see his child, which is horrific. I don't understand in what world this is acceptable. It's just so depressing. So the original article was in French because it is from, I think, a Quebec-based news outlet, but it's all centered around French Canada. So the article goes as follows. In a family law case involving a 12-year-old child, a judge temporarily suspended the father's access rights because he is not vaccinated against COVID-19. This would be the first judgment depriving a parent of his access rights in connection with vaccination, according to Sylvie Sherm, who is a lawyer specialising in family law. She recalls that in Quebec, disputes involving children are decided on the basis of the following criterion: what is in their best interest. So apparently this judge has concluded that a child not seeing their own father is in their best interest because he's not vaccinated, despite the fact that it is a 12-year-old child who, by all measures, is not at risk of
How can they have the nerve?
Getting ill.
How can they have the nerve?
It's so depressingly appalling. There are no words of contempt to describe that, the state getting between a father and their child's relationship.
It's the arrogance of it to think that they know better about the interests of their child and the father.
Mm-hmm. So Judge Valincourt says that it would normally have been in the best interest of the child to have contact with his father, but not in his best interest to have contact with him if he is not vaccinated and is opposed to health measures in the current epidemiological context. And the article goes on to say, in this particular case, the mother of the child has custody and the father has access rights, including every other weekend and a week during the holiday season, all of which is written into an agreement. It is the father who presented a request to the courts in mid-December to obtain a modification to his rights of access, as well as one more day with his child during the holidays. So the father took this to the courts to have one more day with his child, and this is the repayment that he gets from the court, which is just absolutely appalling. The mother opposed it. She requested the suspension of his access rights after learning very recently that he was not vaccinated against COVID. She added that he would be a conspirator and an anti-vaxxer. And I think that might be a bit of a translation error there.
Maybe.
But she's basically saying he's a conspiracy theorist and an anti-vaxxer. But I've translated it relatively directly.
Yeah, and what his ideas are dangerous for the child. But is this what they're making the judgment on?
I'm presuming so, but we will get onto that. So if the court refused to suspend access, she wanted the period to be limited to what was provided for in their agreement. The fact that he was not vaccinated, she claims it was very worrying for her since it refers to the 12-year-old as a teenager, but they're French, who knows? Don't judge their views on age, walks from one household to another. The judge noted that the teenager received 2 doses. I'm just going to call them a child. I don't know why they're saying teenager. They're 12 years old. The child received 2 doses, but the father is not vaccinated. The latter declared in court to have reservations about the vaccine, but maintained to respect the sanitary measures, in particular not going out. However, he does not present any argument to support or explain his reservation, notes the magistrate. In addition, extracts from the Facebook page of Monsieur, produced by Madame, reveals that he actually seems to oppose vaccines and health measures, retains the judge, and even suggests that he is indeed what one commonly calls a conspirator or a conspiracy theorist, as they're alleging. So the court has a strong reason to doubt that it respects the measures in place, and it affirms to do this in its written declaration. Sorry. However, the child is doubly vaccinated, enjoys some protection against the virus, claims the article. It is written in the judgment as well. Is this enough to allow him to be around his father? I think we both certainly agree, but the article asks the question regardless. No, according to the judge, says the article, it is legal knowledge that the protection is not total and that even seems to be reduced in the face of the Omicron variant, which is currently spreading in Quebec. It is also known from legal knowledge that this variant is highly contagious, and another fact tipped the balance for the judge. The mother resides with her partner and 2 children under the age of 5. He therefore considers that he must also consider the best interests of the latter. They are not vaccinated against COVID-19 because vaccination is currently not available to their age group. And it's not available to their age group because they are not vulnerable to the virus. That's why. You stupid judge. Judge Valancourt, however, decreed that the suspension of access rights to this father should be of a short duration due to the rapid evolution of the epidemiological situation. Took me a while there. And he could also decide to be vaccinated, which would be a game changer. Thus, the judge's decision is valid until the beginning of February, at which time everyone's rights will be reassessed. So, could potentially be a further suspension maybe, but he's not able to see his own child for a month because the government says so. And this is morally repugnant to me.
Why are they doing this?
Yes, it's just disgusting, really. I
mean, for a start, there's the admission that the vaccines they seem to believe in, this is not us saying anything about the vaccines themselves, aren't working because what? Actually, I think I might have misread that the child hasn't been vaccinated.
They have, yeah.
Okay, no, I did misread that then, or read that correctly. So the child's been vaccinated, but the vaccine's not good enough to ward off the threat of his father, despite the fact that even unvaccinated children are at second to no risk, according to the data, of even experiencing a single symptom.
Yes.
And this is a justification for him not being allowed to see his father.
Yes, of course, the fault is not just in the judge here. Of course, his, what I presume to be ex-wife, is also partially to blame as well for causing a fuss in the first place. And I'm reminded of the quote.
Is her name Karen?
It might be. Not very French, though. Hell hath no fury, like a woman scorned. And it seems like there's a certain amount of that going on here. So, moving on to something a bit more, I suppose, just as depressing. So this has been in the news in the UK at the very least, that 800 Brits were fined during the week of Downing Street Bring Your Own Drinks party, which broke their own rules in which the government set. And this is Rory's dispatch here talking about it. So I'm just going to read the full thing out because it's very good. Pleased with the work we do, of course. UK police dealt more than 800 fines to members of the public for breaking lockdown rules in the week of the Downing Street party to which 100 people were invited. And of course, Downing Street being the government. In the week between May 15th and May 21st, 2020, police handed out 807 fixed penalty notices under COVID lockdown laws in England and Wales, National Police Chiefs Council data obtained by The Independent shows. On the 20th of May 2020, Boris Johnson and his wife, Carrie Symonds, are alleged to have been among 30 people who attended a Bring Your Own Booze drinks gathering in the garden of 10 Downing Street on May 20th, 2020. At the time, restrictions on social gatherings only allowed outdoor mixing with one member of another household in public spaces, not private gardens. Fines for breaking lockdown rules in the period range between £100 and £3,200, with the government stating that the higher fines were a reflection of the increased risk to others of breaking the rules as people are returning to work and school. And funnily enough, there have been no fines to the government. That's strange, isn't it? It's almost like they live to a different standard, isn't it?
It is. Yeah.
Funny. The most recent gathering of its kind emerged on a list of 10 others in the revelations of the Downing Street parties. Blah, 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 blah. You get the idea. The government are hypocrites, right? So then I found a rather heartbreaking article by the BBC, which it spoke to people who basically lost family members who they weren't able to see while this Downing Street party was going on. Whilst they had hundreds of people having a party, the people who followed the rules suffered, and this is some pretty difficult stuff to listen to. So, first of which, if you scroll down a bit, John, is Ruby Fuller, who was 18 years old, and she died from leukemia 5 days before the Downing Street garden party, on the same day as the gathering reportedly happened in the same garden complex, complete with wine and cheese. The lockdown rules meant that Ruby had to say goodbye to her friends, grandparents and other relatives via video call from the family home in Crystal Palace, South London.
That's just awful.
Her mother, Emma Jones, says Boris Johnson's apology does not go far enough and he should resign as Prime Minister. I think that's a very conservative way of putting it. I think you could go a lot further than that.
That's a very, very measured comment, given that she's her mother.
She tells the BBC she now feels stupid for adhering to the restrictions and that it is really infuriating that the people who made the rules appeared to have created them just for the little people.
Just for the plebs.
Yes, and that is
how
exactly how it happened. While she doesn't blame Mr. Johnson or the pandemic for Ruby's death, Miss Jones, a 51-year-old environmental consultant, says adhering to the restrictions made the excruciatingly painful situation of her daughter's death so much harder. And of course, we are seeing the consequences of these horrific policies here. You're preventing a father from spending time with their child. You're preventing a dying young girl, basically, from saying goodbye to her friends and family, and making the quite frankly impossible to comprehend suffering of her mother even worse. I mean, that alone should really hammer home just how evil what the government has been doing really is. Of course, not being able to say goodbye to her in person or being together made the grieving so much harder. One of her friends says before she died, she wrote a list of things she wanted her family to do. One request was that she be remembered by the phrase "live kindly and live loudly," and speaking out about the latest revelations, Emma feels she is fulfilling her daughter's motto. Ruby would have been so mad about this, she took part in every protest going, and if there was a march on this, she would have gone to it with her protest banner. But there are also many other cases of such things. So the article goes on to list, Tony Kent contacted us to say her mother died on the 22nd of May 2020, a couple of days after the Downing Street party. The lockdown rules in place then prevented her from breaking the news to her brother in person. Tony's brother has Down syndrome and lives in a care home, and she had to break the news to him on an internet call when he was supported by care assistants. And she says, you can imagine how heartbreaking this was. He used to speak to our mum every day, and she was his sole parent. To discover that drinks and parties were taking place between the very people who were telling us that we could not meet each other is sickening to hear. And another case is a man whose mother-in-law died alone 10 days before the Downing Street drinks party, says that it's infuriating that the government seemingly broke its own rules. Jamie Briffett from Caerphilly in Wales says only 9 people could attend the funeral. His wife was shielding as she was waiting for a liver transplant, which she had in October 2020, he says. She has this deep regret and guilt that she could not be with her mother in her final days. She feels like this. She will feel like this for the rest of her life, he says. We find it absolutely infuriating and irresponsible that the government could go ahead and have a party while so many of their fellow citizens were abiding the rules. This is totally unacceptable and absolutely shocking, he says. And the PM should come clean and own up and face the music. And yet, there is one more case. There's more in the article, but I think it's just slightly too much to go through it all at once.
It does just kind of make you feel stupid for complying at any level when you just listen to cases like this.
It's so harrowing, isn't it? So the final one I'm going to read out here is Lisa Wilkie's brother Graham was in hospital in intensive care on the 20th of May 2020, the day the Downing Street garden parties happened. He died a few days later, and the COVID rules meant that relatives could not be with him or grieve together. Instead of holding my mum, I was holding my phone, filming my brother dying, she tells the BBC News. People sacrificed so much, people died, sticking to the rules. They, the Downing Street party guests, broke those rules to have a bottle of wine. So that's some of the more harrowing things that really put into perspective the human consequences of why these restrictions are so awful. Sure, you can list off data, you can talk about how illiberal things are, but I think looking at the actual human consequences of things is one of the best ways to see that this is wrong. This isn't human. This is making...
We should never have done this.
Yeah,
we should never have done this. There was another way out of dealing with this pandemic, and it was not to follow China. What we should have done is mobilize the young, healthy, those who they should mobilize, keep things going, and do everything they can to protect people like this who don't just need to be protected at a molecular level from illness and whatnot, but who need to be socially looked after as well, and to maintain that essential part of everyone's lives. It's almost as if they were given a more brutal death in our attempts to try to protect them through lockdown.
I know, and I don't think we should forgive the government for stealing basically our humanity. Not only is the hypocrisy of the government appalling, the fact that these restrictions existed at all is kind of disgusting, and I think we should see it as such. Maybe the people that want more restrictions should maybe think about the human consequences of what this actually means for people's families, and this is something that I think should bear in everyone else's minds, that what the government has done to ordinary people.
If you want to see more from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to enjoy all of the premium content we have on the site, such as this premium article by me, exploring how inclusivity is in fact the most exclusionary belief system of all time. If you prefer to listen to our articles rather than read, we have an audio track recorded by our external reader, John Crow, available to Silver Tier members. You can get access to all of our premium content with a Bronze Tier membership for just £5 a month. If you'd like to stay up to date with all the content we're putting out on the site, you can follow Lotus Eaters on Getter as well at getter.com. You can also follow our individual writers and presenters, such as Harry here. Thank you and goodbye.